fifth graders, I have a book especially for you that you're really going to like. It's an older novel. It has not been around a lot, but it is a great book for all you outdoor enthusiasts, and especially boys, you will like this as well. This is called Weakfoot, or The Ghost of Cramer's Island, and it is by Linda Klein. And you can tell by my book here, this book is really, really worn. I better see if I can find a new copy somewhere. This book is actually my favorite book, and I've had it for years upon years upon years, because it was mine when I was in elementary school or middle school. Okay, it is, I can't even find the publisher, it's so old. Oh, Scholastic Books, because Scholastic Books were around. Okay, so we're going to start with the chapter today and lead you on. And again, this is about a boy, his dog, his adventures, and what happens in a swamp. And this book actually takes place on the border of Georgia and Florida. So right across the northern border of Florida and Georgia in the Okefenokee Swamp. And this is the prologue. Remember what a prologue is. It's an introduction by the author to the book. I met the old man by accident. I had arrived by getting lost. His home was a shack, weather-worn, unpainted. There was no running water or electricity. He said he had never been out of the county but once, and that was a trip of less than 100 miles. When he was young, there had been no automobiles, no paved roads, no airplanes had ever crossed the skies. His home was 4 miles off Highway 177, 11 miles from Edith, Georgia. I had driven down a narrow, twisting, sandy road, which ended in his packed clay yard. It was an area we know today as the Great Okefenokee Swamp. But to the old man and the people in his story, it was Cypress Swamp. He told these events as truth. I repeat his story as I heard it, as he told it to me. Chapter 1. Bay's nose quivered and his long tail wagged slowly back and forth. Lonnie Bascombe hooked his cow horn to his belt, aware of the red-boned hound's eyes following every movement. Pa and Aunt Louise watched the boy and his dog. Pa's blue eyes twinkling, Bay did a sidewalking dance as Lonnie lifted the long-barreled rifle down from the 2 pegs on the wall. Pa had built the gun rack for the boy when Lonnie received his first rifle last year. Lonnie pulled back the single hammer and pretended to examine the weapon closely. A throaty grumble rose from Bay's chest. Lonnie looked at his dog and his eyebrows raised. "What's eating you, you flea hound?" Then quickly, he placed the rifle back up on the pegs and hung the cow horn beside it. "Did you think I was going somewhere?" Lonnie asked. Bay's grumble burst into a tremendous woof. Pause. And there goes my dog woofing. Pa's eyes sharpened and his mouth spread to a smile. "Did you think I was taking a no-good dog like you a-hunting?" Lonnie asked. Bay's voice came again, and the dishes in the cupboard rattled with his bark. "Don't do old Bay like that, Lonnie," Pa said. His tone was rough, but he made no move to stop this game that Bay and Lonnie always played before going out for a day of hunting. Lonnie cuffed the dog's head and took down the cow horn and gun again. "Well, we'll be back afore night," Lonnie said. "Oh, you will you?" Aunt Louise said sharply. "It better be way afore night unless you like chopping wood in the dark." Pa's booming laughter filled the kitchen as the boy and the dog bounded across the back porch and jumped to the ground. The sun etched shadow patterns on the road and clay yard as it filtered through lollipolly pines and pecan trees. Beyond was the chicken run and a cornfield still in the shade of the cypress swamp. Lonnie walked to the split rail fence and climbed it and then paused, listening. The click of trace chains and the snort of a mule carried crystal clear in the breathless morning air. He stepped down from the fence and waited, watching, a clearing that someone down the road had to pass before approaching the house. "Hey, Pa!" Lonnie yelled. "Here comes Doc Manners." Pa's shoulders almost touched both sides of the door when he came out. Doc Manners waved from down the road, and they waved back. Doc always had the latest news about town folks, and a few good jokes besides. One of the best woodsmen in the county, too. Doc was the only man alive who had wrestled Weakfoot with his own bare hands. Once a year at least, Doc got his hounds and spent a week or two trying to track down the big cat. Because of Weakfoot, Doc had carried a leg that grew stiff when the weather turned. The first battle with Weakfoot had been an accident. The hounds got on the cat's scent, and Doc unintentionally cornered Weakfoot. The panther sprang on him, and only Doc's hound saved him. He got in one good shot, but the elusive cat was up and gone before he could reload his firearm. Lonnie often thought about Doc's description of the fight and imagined himself holding the big cat at bay. The mule pulled Doc's wagon into the yard, and Doc yanked up the reins and shouted insults at the mule for no apparent reason. He sat on the plank seat of the wagon, and his feet on either side of the mule's rump, glaring down at Pa and Lonnie. "Howdy, Doc," Pa said, frowning at the elusive, abusive language. Pa never raised his voice, and no man claimed he had ever heard otherwise. "Howdy, howdy," Doc said. He leaned far to one side and spit a nugget of tobacco juice to the ground. "Come on in for a cup of coffee?" Pa asked. Only then did Doc step down from the wagon. He stood not quite as tall as Pa, and Doc had eyes black as lumps of coal and could make a good man tremble when Doc lost his temper. Doc's lower lip sank in as if he might have had false teeth and never wore the bottom ones. "Howdy, Spitfire," Doc said to Lonnie as he jabbed a thumb at Lonnie's ribs, but Lonnie expected it and jumped to the side. Lonnie followed the two men inside the house. Aunt Louise was hustling to make the room presentable, and Doc caught her with her hair straggling whips around her flushed face. She got 2 mugs for the men as Pa and Doc sat across from one another, their knees almost touching beneath the table. "What's the news?" Pa asked. "Well, Ma Barker's girl, Darlene, got married," Doc said, watching Aunt Louise pour steaming coffee. "Baker's Gin is opening 2 weeks earlier than usual this year, 'cause it's been so infernal dry," he continued. "And I got a tidbit for your hunting warrior," Doc said, jerking his head towards Lonnie. He took a sip of his coffee before saying more. "Old Weakfoot," Doc said. Lonnie's fingers tightened at his rifle. Doc was in no hurry to finish, stretching the boy's suspense long as agony. "What about him?" Pa said, speaking of Weakfoot. Doc took another sip of his coffee. "Well, I seen him, that's what." "Did he kill something?" Pa asked. "Not yet," Doc said shortly, his bushy eyebrows lowered. "If I'd had my gun, I could have shot him sure as I'm here," Doc said bitterly. "The one day I leave my rifle at home and Weakfoot crosses the road, so close I thought that lop-eared mule was going to climb up in the wagon beside me." Pa's lips drew tight, and he stared down at his cup. Lonnie remembered stories about the panther, big as a year-old heifer and black as night. The name Weakfoot came from the soft print of the cat's hind paw. The panther had limped ever since Doc had shot him. "I'm not wanting to see him myself," Pa said. Fearing his story was lagging, Doc continued. "He slunk across the road, his belly so low along the ground, barely touching it, his tail straight out behind him, curving graceful in the middle. He didn't look left, and he didn't look right. Just came out of one side of the road and disappeared on over to the other. Gone, just like a shadow." "Which way?" Lonnie questioned. Pa's eyes cut sharply. "Never you mind which way," Pa said. "Don't go getting any ideas about sicking that hound on Weakfoot." "Went toward Cramer Island," Doc said, so as though he hadn't heard Pa. come across that road with his ears back, paying no mind to me or that no-accounting mule. Lonnie moved on to the end of the table. Doc Manners turned to the boy. He's a killer cat. That one mean and fast as greased lightning, boy. Next, most cats weigh 25 to 70 pounds. I figure Weakfoot tops 90. Pa's frown deepened. Weakfoot is no more dangerous than any other animal, unless he's cornered. Doc's eyes sparked. For an instant, Lonnie thought Pa was angry. Then shaking his head, Doc said, "Your Pa's so peaceable, he takes up for killer cats." He softened his bite in his words with a grin, and then slid a sideways grin on his face. Pa gazed steadily at Doc. "You know I'm speaking the truth, though." Doc Manners took another slurp of his coffee. "Maybe I do," he said. Pa's voice did not change as he spoke again. "Plenty of pigs and calves were lost because that cat got away wounded and too stiff to catch his own natural food. Through no fault of mine," Doc said tersely. "We hunted Weakfoot for 5 days and nights, but no dog could catch him, and no man moved without a dog to guide him." Doc's eyes narrowed. With $200 bounty that's been put on him over the past 5 years, you'd think somebody would have hunted that cat down by now. I guess folks still count their blessings and hounds in more ways than their dollars. Pa glared at Lonnie, listening eagerly. "Is Baker's Gin gonna open exactly 2 weeks early?" Pa said, changing the subject. "Christian, can you run in and get my glasses, please, next to the salt and pepper?" The talk turned to cotton and watermelon and the price of store goods. Soon Doc was pounding one fist on the table and telling Pa how outrageously high prices were. That only rich folks like Judge White were going to make any money this year. Lonnie hitched up his britches to ease the weight of the cow horn on his belt and the cartridge on both pockets. He walked out the door and hopped to the porch. Bay was waiting by the steps. "Get your nose out of that dirt, Bay." Lonnie affectionately slapped the red bone hound on the rump. "Let's go. See what's left this late in the morning." And this is where we're stopping right now, and we will be continuing as Lonnie begins his hunt with finishing chapter 1. Stay tuned. Bye-bye now.